We are back, and we are joined now by Adrienne Marie Brown, activist, scholar, and New York Times bestselling author whose latest book is entitled Loving Corrections. Adrienne, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me, Emma.
So, we've talked a lot on this show about how people are really lacking in community these days. I mean, whether it be public space shrinking due to rampant privatization, whether it be like many parts of the country just being atomized geographically, or suburbia being this place where people have little fiefdoms and there's very little community involvement. It increases a lot of, I feel like it exacerbates bigotry, it creates conspiracism and things like that. And it seems like that is such a central focus of your book, community through activism, through hearing one another. How conscious were you of maybe that kind of alienation that a lot of people seem to be experiencing in recent years?
I felt very conscious of it. I've been doing work in terms of trying to create more justice and more liberation in the world for almost 25 years. And one of the things I have witnessed over and over again is how people respond when they're given a chance to connect with each other and support each other, and how people respond when they're given instruction or pushed to divide from each other. And I see that divisiveness growing and growing. And I can really see how rapidly it's grown even in the last 5 years. And I saw it happening in every community, every space that I was in. And I'm an interracial kid. You know, I'm someone who operates with a lot of different communities that I feel like I'm a part of. And so for me, when I was seeing it, I was like, oh, this is a breaking down of places that I know can get along. Like, I know they can hear each other. I know they can understand each other. So I felt really mindful of how could I create a tool that people could use to have better conversations with each other.
I love that because when we hear about divisiveness in specifically in the context of politics, it's
Mm-hmm.
usually about like, will you just stop calling us out for being racist? Stop being
Mm-hmm.
so divisive.
Yeah.
And your book has so many it's like a guide for so many different kinds of people to build solidarity.
Mm-hmm.
But how do you draw a distinction between shunning opinions and people and far right movements in the way that they
Mm-hmm.
should be shunned, and balancing that with creating solidarity with people who may not be there yet or may need some hand holding to get to a certain place?
Yeah. I mean, I think that we're in a really interesting moment right now where, like, there are these big concepts, you know, MAGA, the far right, there's these huge concepts. And I think it can make us forget that we're actually in relationship, many of us, with people who are a part of whatever those huge concepts are. And as long as you're in a relationship, something else is possible still. So part of what I wanted to do was write a book that I was like, you can hand this to your racist uncle and then sit down and have a conversation about what comes up when you're talking about it. Um, I've also been talking a lot. I was book touring this around the South, and a question came up around shame. Like, what about shame? Don't we need to like make people ashamed of some of these perspectives that they have? And the way I responded to it, which has been really sitting with me, is that we use shame to shrink things. And so we do want to shrink these concepts. You know, I want to shrink the concept of white supremacy or any supremacy. I want to shrink the concept of the earth being a disposable place. I want to shrink the concept that we can harm each other without any accountability. I want to not shrink the people. I want to shrink those ideas. I want to reclaim the people. I've almost been talking about it as people get caught in these prisons of ideas where they don't even understand that they're inside a limited space, and that they're sometimes have born into it, growing up in it, growing up completely surrounded by people who are telling them hate is the only way you can belong. Looking down on others is the only way you can belong. Um, Limiting other people's rights and freedoms is the only way you can belong or have power. Part of what we have to do is break each other out of those kind of ideas. And unfortunately, I always say, I'm like, if this worked, maybe we would try it. Like, if shame worked, maybe I would try it. But I'm like, I have not met people who get very ashamed about being white supremacist and that that's the way it works. So then we have to try a different tactic. And I'm always like, how do we use our energy in the best possible way? For me, relationship is one of the best possible ways I know to actually make change. So it's reaching back out and saying, can we have a disagreement and stay connected? And can I still see your humanity when we're having this conversation? And if not, can I set a good boundary that still honors your humanity?
It's is shame a very American concept? Like, is the way? I mean,
I think
there's
that shame has been around forever,
yeah.
but I do think that there's a way that we deploy it that is, I think there's a way we do almost everything that is unique, which is, I think we have an idea of being better. Like we have an idea of ourselves as like the best nation in the world. And we have an idea of everything we're doing as being better than what anyone else is doing. And I think from that place, shame hits different, right? Because you're just like, oh, we're really trying to demoralize people. We're really trying to bring them down so that they will behave and they'll be part of the American experiment without trying to challenge it too much or change it too much, right?
It just
And we make
occurs to
fun of
me,
each other instead
yeah.
of building each other up and building up the kind of values and the values and the communities that we actually want.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No, it's fine. It was
it just
something was coming up for you, right?
yeah, it just occurs to me that there's this very Protestant element of shame, or to a degree, but I think you're right in the sense of it shame is also atomizing in and of itself as opposed to communal, and I think that that's maybe why it doesn't have the efficacy that you describe.
Well, and I think that this is the same thing where people talk about cancel culture. I've written about this, but this idea of like, isn't that person ashamed of what they've done? And I think if we move that way, then often what happens is people isolate, they shift into a different community, and they continue doing harmful things, or they keep doing the thing that was so shameful in the first place. And we shrink as movements who are trying to change. We shrink and shrink and shrink because we just keep losing people to this sort of shameful, they're moving away from us. I'm interested in a different move. And I'm not saying you have to go for the furthest away from you, space politically. I'm not saying you have to call the most racist person, or the most, whatever, deplorable, the person who's like most anti your existence, right? Because I do have people in my family who are homophobic, transphobic, all those things. I have all those things in my family. I'm not necessarily reaching all the way to them, but I might reach to my mom who is still in a relationship with people and have a conversation with her that is like, how can I be really loving in my conversation with you? And then that you be really loving when you're in direct conversation with folks who are maybe too challenging for me to be in contact with right now. Like that's a real thing. And then I do feel like I do want a future where people feel ashamed to be racist. I do want a future where people feel ashamed to be homophobic. But I think, again, it has to happen at a collective and mass level rather than trying to individually target people because they can just shift out of accountability and go other places. I think that there's something so important about being able to sit down with someone and say, I think there's better. I think that you could be better. I think that our relationship could be better. And I think it would mean us seeing each other's humanity. And when you speak like this, when you talk like this, when you vote like this, I feel like you don't see my humanity and you don't care about my life. And I'm not giving up on you, And
Right.
I think that's a really different approach than just being like, oh, you said that? Don't like, that's it. Now I'm leaving you to them because the them is growing. that body of people, I feel like 10 years ago, there's a lot of things that happen now in our political realm that would be unimaginable even 10 years ago, because we've just been conceding the territory. We've been like, oh yeah, you're just ridiculous. Go over there with the ridiculous people. And all of a sudden you have a huge, huge, massive voting block of people who are not connected to reality, not connected to science, not connected to community who holds them accountable. We can't afford that at this stage for the whole planet, for the whole species. We can't afford that.
And your first essay is directed towards men, right?
It is.
You speak about how it's the first words are "dear men," and you wanted to address seemingly patriarchy right off the bat. So
Yeah.
much of what you're describing reminds me of other things we've discussed on the show about how incel online culture is growing, and for young men in particular. I know
Yeah.
someone in my life who, when they were in a very lonely period of their life, was into Jordan Peterson. Then when in a relationship, more community is just a progressive leftist, right? I mean, those things
Yeah.
that happens. But what's the incel stuff? They create these extremely rigid gender binaries. They
Mhm.
talk about the value of women or as sexual objects in this extremely almost scientific way where they try to naturalize it. They give these young men these ideas. They go out into the real world.
Yeah.
Many women are turned off by the obvious rigidity of these gender roles. Then they get
Yeah.
rejected and they go back for more. And that
Yeah.
cycle to me is something I thought about when I saw what you were writing about, uh, you know, telling men practice sitting in groups with other men was one of the planks, but also be vigilant about your masculinity not becoming toxic, and
Yeah.
that becomes so much harder when there's that isolation, and then they go to these influencers on the internet.
Yeah, I think we have so many people now who have a podcast or have a platform, have a space to spew all kinds of stuff. And I think we're also in this really interesting moment in history that, sometimes like when you're in something, you don't recognize what's happening. So I think when we were part of women's empowerment movement and women fighting for equality in the workplace and feminism movement, there's been all this movement, forward movement of women, forward movement of non-binary and trans people, forward movement. And instead of men feeling like, oh, wonderful, like that's great, like, all of humanity is coming into right relationship, there's this sense of I'm losing my power, I'm losing my place, I don't know where I belong, I don't know how to be what I was trained to be. I was trained to be an alpha protector male. I have an automatic importance in society. And now that's shifting, where it's like you're not more important than anyone else in this society. And that can be a gift if you embrace it. But if you are being told you need to fight and you need to push these people back down, that's what all the abortion stuff is about. That's what all the reproductive justice, struggles are about, is trying to push all the other genders back into their place so that men can maintain this dominance that they've been told they get to have. And what I was witnessing was seeing it really intimately, seeing it in relationships of women that I loved who were having children with men who then would slip into these regressive behaviors under pressure when they hit their midlife crisis mode, and just feeling so sad because I was like, I know that's not your soul. I know that's not, the spark of the miracle of life that is in you was not put on earth in order to terrify the women around you and to make us feel unsafe and to make us feel disempowered. So that letter for me was a love note to these men who I had at different points in my life looked at as brothers, looked at as beloveds, looked at as friends, and now was facing and seeing this violence, this pain coming through them. And I've actually had, since the essay first came out, that was one that was published on my blog before it was in the book. And I've had lots of people reach out to me because they've started groups of men who are sitting with each other and being like, how do we really reckon with having been raised inside of a system that we now want to eradicate from ourselves, that we want to heal from, and we want to find ways to access our whole humanity, which means being able to access the part of us that hurts and that is vulnerable and that wants to be a part of community and that wants to learn to be in love and be a good dad and be a good family member. I think most humans want the same things, but the stories that we're told really impact what we can have access to in a lifetime. So part of what I'm trying to do here is tell some different stories.
Yeah, there's a dearth of positive masculinity in representation, and
Yeah.
I think right now about the Trump campaign and what JD Vance represents in that area, and it's
Honey.
it's exactly
Yes.
what you're talking. I mean,
Yeah.
it's exactly what you're talking about, and the part about men and their, you implore and say for men to be vigilant about their masculinity becoming toxic when they
Yeah.
are in between their 30s and 50s. You
Yeah.
hinted at it there, but can you explain what you feel that phenomenon is tied to?
Yeah. And I think, I'm really curious to see if this stays true over the next 50 years or so. But in this moment, we're in this transition phase, right? Where a lot of men were still born into a world where they were being trained to be these alpha male characters. And then there's been this huge shift in economics and power dynamics for men. And so now you have these men who are like, okay, like I'm down with that and like kind of down with the idea of feminism, but wait, I didn't expect to feel so disempowered and unseated in my life. And so I'm 30 or 40 and I'm not the boss like that I thought I would be. Maybe I'm having to report to a woman. Maybe my wife is the person who's making more money than I am. How does my family look at me? Do they see me as a success if I'm a stay-at-home dad or if I'm sharing that load? I think that there's a real sense of identity loss of like, I don't quite know how to be this new kind of man or this other kind of man. And for me, a lot of the invitation is like, you don't have to be a different man. You just have to be a human, right? What we're inviting you towards is that there's a center place where it's like, this is what humanity actually is for all of us. That's what we want to invite you back into. You've been in a place where you think man puts you over here and women puts you down here, right? We're just saying, come back into humanity. We're all actually completely capable of doing all the things. And most of the things we actually need to do together. You know, that's the other piece of this for me is I think men are reaching this age where a lot of what they've been told is that they're going to reach individual success, but we're actually in a massive shift where we need to do everything we're doing together in community. Like we're in a really precarious place. Our climate is a precarious place. We're on the brink of a lot of world war troubles. We're already involved in just so much struggle, so much pain, so much harm. We're in danger. Like as a species, we're in danger. Men need to come and be a part of getting through this period, right? And we share the earth with them. I say this all the time because I'll look at someone like JD Vance or Trump or whatever, and I'm like, I don't want to give that any of my life force, any of my attention. But then I'm like, I do share this earth with that person. I have to figure out how to contend with they're trying to contend for power. I have to be able to contend for power as well. And I have to be able to deal with the fact that they exist and something in them is so wounded and needs so much healing. And I might not be able to heal that person in my lifetime, but I can create more space for masculinity that is part of humanity.
Very well said, and I love that essay in your book. Again, people should read this and give it to men in your life that you think may be open to it, or maybe if they aren't.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.